If you want to buy an HDB flat, one of the key questions that you need to decide is whether you want to get a BTO or buy a resale flat. In this video, I'm going to break down the pros and cons of each approach, and at the end, I will also suggest which route to choose based on the most common scenario. Okay, let's start with a bang. Let's talk about profit. Isn't this one of the key questions you have in mind? How much is the potential profit that you can get from flipping BTO versus resale, assuming you want to quickly sell it after MOP? A few years ago, the answer was more straightforward, but now, with the new HDB classification, the answer is not as simple. Plus and prime HDB BTO projects come with a 10-year MOP, some subsidy clawback, cannot rent out the whole flat even after MOP, PR couples cannot buy, and an income ceiling for the future potential buyers. Standard BTO projects still have a 5-year MOP, but their locations are not ideal. So, it will be more difficult to expect high profit from flipping a BTO in the future. But what some analysts predicted, and I also agree, is that the resale HDB flat price around plus and prime projects might get a boost, especially if they are still relatively young and have a long tenure left. This is because these resale flats will have more or less the same amenities with the plus and prime projects, but with the standard 5-year MOP. So, which one can bring you more profit? Is it BTO or resale? With the new classification, it will be harder to tell. But the rule of thumb is, if you can get a new BTO or a young resale near MRT station, regardless of whether it's a mature or non-mature estate, at a good reasonable price and hold it for 5 to 10 years, you still have a good chance of making good profit. Let's use past BTO projects as an example. Fernvale Grove is a BTO project in Sengkang area that was built back in 2007. When it was launched, the average price of a 4-room flat was above $145,000, but just after MOP, the average transacted price was more than $500,000, making the owner gain more than $360,000 or around 250%. Compare it with the famous Pinnacle at Duxton, which was launched back in 2009 and located downtown. When it was launched, the average price of a 4-room flat was more than $340,000, but just after MOP, the average transacted price was above $860,000, making the owner gain around $522,000. And again, this is the average transacted price right after MOP. If we compare it with today's resale price, of course the difference will be even more magnificent. Anyway, profiting over $500,000 seems a lot, but if you calculate it as a percentage, the gain is 154%, which is actually under the Sengkang BTO project that I mentioned earlier as the first example. So how did this happen? Isn't Pinnacle at Duxton a more desirable location than Fernvale Grove? Yes, but Fernvale Grove BTO launch price was significantly lower, hence the return on investment becomes larger in terms of percentage. This proves my point that as long as you can buy a unit at a low price near MRT or LRT station and hold it long enough, you can still make a profit even though the location seems ulu-ulu. On the other hand, if you buy a resale HDB flat in a great location but it was already over $1 million when you bought it, it will be challenging to find a buyer, especially due to the lease decay. And if you can't find a buyer, then there's no profit in your pocket. Now let's talk about price. Obviously, BTO will be cheaper than resale, right? But the question is, how big is the gap? Based on data from HDB website, if we compare between BTO price versus resale price for a 4-room flat, we can see that in a non-mature estate, the price gap between BTO and resale is roughly around $200,000. The price gap is significantly bigger in a mature estate, which can be around $400,000 to $500,000. Of course, the exact numbers will be different depending case by case, but I'm just talking in general. I highly recommend calculating your budget to buy the house, including CPF, your cash savings, etc. Then calculate how much is the estimated total cost for your house purchase. Why? Because you need to budget not only for the house price, but also other things that comes with it. For example, agent commission, stamp duty, legal fee, renovation, etc. In general, renovation for resale flats tend to be higher because the unit is older, the design is more outdated, and might already come with some built-in that you don't necessarily like. Ripping out old stuffs like floors or reinstating a wall can quickly add up on your bill. Hence, it might be costly if you want to completely change the look. On the other hand, renovating a BTO is generally cheaper because it's still a blank canvas. Your current living situation also makes a difference. If while waiting for a BTO or resale unit, you need to pay rent, then you need to calculate how much would it cost for your temporary housing while waiting. Waiting for a BTO, let's just say, can take 5 years from balloting plus construction and renovation time, while for resale, let's say 6 months including renovation. Unless you can stay with family members while waiting, then the waiting cost doesn't necessarily matter. If your budget is very limited, then BTO is still a cheaper choice in general, assuming you can stay with family members while waiting until you get the keys. Okay, next let's talk about housing grants. There are grants for both options, but resale flats might actually give you more housing grants. One big grant is the Enhanced CPF Housing Grant or EHG, which you can use either for BTO or resale. But there's also the Proximity Housing Grant, which can only be used for resale flats if you are buying near parents or kids. The exact grant that you qualify depend on your family situation, how much you earn, and if it's the first time you're buying. For example, to get the most of Enhanced CPF Housing Grant of $80,000, you can't earn too much together, which means that you need to earn less than $9,000 monthly combined. So please do check out what grants are you qualified for, as it will also impact your overall budget. If upgrading to a condo is one of your goals, then we need to talk about the potential timeline until you can upgrade. If you buy a BTO, the MOP is calculated from the point of key collection and not sale. So, if you buy a flat that takes, let's say, 4 years to build, then another 5 or even 10 years until the MOP ends, we're talking about 9 to 14 years before you can sell the unit. On the other hand, if you buy a resale HDB, between the OTP process, HDB application process, and renovation, etc., usually you are looking at under 1 year or even faster than at the 5-year MOP. So, we are talking about around 6 years or so before you can upgrade. Condo prices have been on a steady climb for the past 10 years. Every new condo seems to be more expensive than the ones built before it. This has made it tough for HDB flats to keep up in terms of value growth. In other words, while both condos and HDB flats go up in price, condos tend to go up by more. Back in 2010, condo prices averaged around $1,000 per square foot. Today, the average is over $2,000 per square foot. For HDB flats, although their price appreciates as well, it is not as drastic as condo because the government is monitoring and intervening with cooling measures and new regulations as and when needed. In summary, the average price gap between a condo and HDB flat has increased over the decade. Hence, the longer you wait, the more difficulty you may experience in upgrading to a condo. Another thing you need to consider is how old will you and your spouse be when you can finally sell your HDB flat. This is because the older you get, the shorter loan tenure is for your mortgage loan because retirement is looming in. Let's discuss this using an example. Let's say that a couple bought a prime BTO project and they are both 30 years old. Assuming the construction time is 5 years and it's another 10 years to finish MOP, that means they will be 45 years old when they can sell their HDB flat. Let's say you want to finish all of your condo mortgage loan by 60 years old. That means the loan tenure for your next property will be 15 years. But the shorter tenure year will also mean higher monthly installments. And remember that you won't be able to rent out the whole flat even after MOP for plus and prime flats. So, which one is better? Buy BTO or resale? I don't want to be like other YouTubers or bloggers who will just say, well, of course, it depends on you. Let's be more specific, shall we? Let's discuss several scenarios. Let's say that you are a young couple in your early 20s, still living with mom and dad, and you just started working, so not much saving and not thinking about having a child just yet. Let's also assume that both of your family's financial conditions are average, so you can't expect them to subsidize your housing needs either. In this scenario, I would say just get a BTO. Why? Because you are not in a rush and you have a limited budget. Let's discuss another scenario. Let's say that you are a couple in your late 20s or early to mid 30s. Your career is relatively stable and you are ready to settle down and even start a family. You have some savings and even already moved out from your parents' house and live in a rental somewhere. Let's assume that you do have the means to buy a humble resale flat, not the $1 million type, but just a decent regular resale flat. But for years, it is as if you have been brainwashed that flipping BTO can make you so much money and you are so afraid of missing out on the potential profit if you go the resale route. In this scenario, I would say just cut the chase and buy a resale HDB. Why? Because If you keep waiting, then you are actually paying for the opportunity cost. Your rental payment is basically funding someone else's financial freedom. The risk of having a special needs child is getting higher the older you are, etc. Another factor to think about is if you keep delaying, there's a chance that your income will exceed the ceiling to buy a BTO unit. You know what? Life is not always about money. If you have the extra budget to buy a young resale unit, then just go for it. You can make more money in another way, either via investment, a side hustle, renting out one of your common rooms, etc. In the third scenario, let's say that you are almost 35 or just turned 35 years old. You are confused because technically singles can apply for BTO after 35 years old. Your career is so-so, hence you haven't crossed the $7,000 income ceiling, and let's assume that you are still living with your parents, so it's rental free, or perhaps you just give them pocket money out of respect. In this scenario, I would suggest applying for a BTO. Why? Well, if you are not in a hurry and your income per month is under $7,000, then buying a BTO will be a more conservative choice financially. The fourth scenario is the perfectionist. Let's say you want everything. You want to move in fast, buy as cheap as possible, but also you want to profit as much as possible, and you are very particular about how the apartment should look and feel, etc. If you fall into this category, sorry to say, but I think you will be unhappy either way, whether you buy BTO or resale, because there are downsides to each approach. But I will say, if you are very fussy/perfectionist, buying a resale flat will give you the opportunity to assess the actual product. You'll get to check first whether your direct neighbor is a serial hoarder. You can see whether the unit is facing the dumpster or not, etc. If you buy a BTO, there are more unpredictable factors. Plus, at the end of the day, it's easier to judge a finished product rather than trying to decipher maps and blueprint layouts. I think these are the most common scenarios that I can think of, but if you have a unique situation, feel free to comment down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye!